What if I told you the color blue did not exist until recently? In fact, right now, there are entire languages that have absolutely zero words for colors. No red, no green, no blue, nothing. This is the case for the Sapir-Whorf people, for example, a group that has baffled linguists for decades. Are they colorblind, or is the language we speak responsible for the colors we see? Let's start with a simple question. What is even a color? A color is the visual perception produced by the activation of the different types of cells in the eye caused by light. So when light is visible, specific cells in our eyes, called cone cells, are activated and they send the information to our brain. Light itself is white and contains all the colors. And you may be asking, if light is white, then why isn't everything white? The reason we're not seeing everything in white is that some objects absorb some of the colors contained in light and reflect that back to us. As a result, they appear in different colors. Light contains a lot of colors, and the human eye is limited in what it can see. This is what we call the visible spectrum. This translates to human beings being able to see about 1 million different colors. Fun fact, some people are capable of seeing even more colors, up to 100 million. This is due to a rare genetic condition called tetrachromacy, where these people have 4 cone cells instead of 3. They have the ability to perceive subtle nuances within the visible spectrum. Now that we know humans can see 1 million colors, how come some people don't have words for colors then? You may think of a medical condition as a potential answer to that, and you'd be partially right. There is a condition where people cannot see colors. It's called achromatopsia, and it's a rare inherited retinal disorder causing an absence of color vision. It also causes extreme light sensitivity and poor visual acuity. It affects approximately 1 in 30,000 people, and it's typically a condition present from birth. Some people are born without the ability to see colors. But that's not really what we're talking about here. Because, sure, some people may not see colors, but they still can use color words to describe what they see. They are still able to use words in their language. It may not be perfect or accurate, and sometimes it may not make a lot of sense, but they still can use color words to describe things. So, what are we looking for here is an entire group or culture speaking a language that simply has no words for colors. How can they describe a color if they don't have a word for it? I mentioned in the intro of this video the Sapir-Whorf as a group that does not have any words for colors. But they're not the only ones, and they might be definitely the most famous ones. Other examples include Beloni speakers from the Solomon Islands or Musi speakers from Ethiopia, all from completely different regions of the world. Here's the thing though, they may not have words for colors, but that does not mean they do not see colors. For example, the Sapir-Whorf usually use 2 words, a word for light and a word for dark. But they can describe other colors too. For example, they use comparisons. There is no word for red. They may say color of blood. They may not have a dedicated word, but they do have ways to express some colors. And once again, they can see colors perfectly fine. Not having a word for them does not mean they cannot see colors. Let's look at another example of a different behavior when it comes to colors. The Himba people in Namibia do not have a word for the color blue, and they are often described as not being able to identify blue. On the other hand, they are also often described as being able to discern many nuances of green. Does this mean that the language we speak determines the colors we see? We just saw that it's not really the case by looking at the Sapir-Whorf, but maybe the languages we know have an influence on our perception of colors. Let's talk about the Himba people we just mentioned. Many articles on the topic of colors and the Himba will mention they have a difficult time distinguishing between blue and green, because they use the same word to categorize both. So it may seem that the language they know influences the way they process colors. And to that extent, this will be true for all of us. Do English speakers really see colors differently than Italian speakers, for example? The example of the Himba seems to tell us that it would be the case, but that's actually not true. The Himba are able to see colors just fine, including blue. and the myth around them all comes down from a BBC documentary. A viral BBC documentary claimed that Himba people could easily distinguish identical-looking shades of green, but they were entirely blind to the difference between blue and green. However, human linguist Mark Lieberman debunked this, revealed that the televised experiment was a completely fabricated dramatization. The actual scientific research measured reaction times, not outright success or failure in distinguishing colors. This means that the BBC's sensationalized claims are scientifically invalid and false. So there are a lot of sensational information going around that may make people believe our languages can affect the way we perceive the world. And it's actually not a new concept. It's called the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, and it dates back to the beginning of the 20th century. The Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, also known as linguistic determinism, proposes that the language you speak impacts and shapes how you perceive and think about the world. This topic would require a whole video dedicated to it, but for now, just keep in mind that it has been debunked many times by many people. We talk about a strong version of this hypothesis, which has been debunked by many linguists over the years, but there is also a weak version of it, stating that languages can influence our thoughts. While the first one is accepted as being ridiculous and wrong, the weak version of it leads to more debate in the scientific world. Some people reject it completely, others accept it to an extent. And while we're not going into more details about this topic, know that colors are usually the best example in favor of a weak version of this theory. Do the language we speak influence how we perceive colors? Even just a bit. So far it seems that no, that's not the case. But let's look at more details here. First, the human eye can perceive about 1 million colors, but when you think about it, we only have a limited amount of words to describe a color. There might be ways to go around it, like using an extra adjective to describe a color. Think of salmon pink that describes a specific tint of pink, or sky blue. But even with this in mind, we are far from having a word for each specific color. We may have a few words to describe some nuances of a color, but not for all of them. Let's look at the colors on the screen. They are different, yet it's likely you called both of them red, and it's likely that you can see the difference between the two. They are not the same, but we still only use one word. But here's something. I just mentioned that looking at the two different red colors from before, you can tell there's a difference. And this is where the weak version of the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis might have some ground. While we can tell colors apart, there's a chance that the time you took to notice that there was a difference was different from someone else. A famous example for that is the Russian language. There are two different words in Russian to describe light blue versus dark blue. Синий, which is used exclusively for dark blue, and голубой, used exclusively for light blue. In a study by Jonathan Wenauer at MIT, it appeared that Russian speakers were faster at identifying shades of blue compared to English speakers because of this feature in their language. Let me emphasize here, Russian speakers do not perceive the physical color spectrum differently, but their language forces them to categorize it uniquely. The same could be said of the Himba people. It's not about being able to recognize colors, but rather about how fast this recognition happens. So there might be an impact of the language we speak in our perception of colors, just not in the perception of the colors themselves, but rather in how we notice them and classify them and the time it takes us to do so. Now that we talked about how colors are described and perceived, let's look at a final point regarding colors in languages. We saw that some languages don't have many words for colors compared to the actual number of colors we can see. Well, it turns out there is also a hierarchy of colors. Different languages will have different words for colors, following a specific hierarchy. This mainly comes from the book Basic Color Terms, Their Universality and Evolution, published in 1969 and written by Brent Berlin and Paul Kay. Keep in mind that there is still a lot of debate about this topic. The authors describe languages to have various stages for color words, where a level needs to be achieved before the next one can appear. Stage 1 being dark cool and light warm. This covers a large set of colors, besides just the English black and white. Stage 2, red appears. No other color will appear before red. Stage 3, either green or yellow can appear, but this requires red to be in the language first. Stage 4, both green and yellow. Stage 5, blue. Stage 6, brown. Stage 7, purple, pink, orange, or gray. What this means is that if a language has the color brown, automatically it has a word for blue or green. The work of Berlin and Kay has been a widespread influence. However, the constraints in color term ordering have been substantially loosened, both by Berlin and Kay in later publications and by various critics. Others have also questioned the methodologies of data collection and the cultural assumption underpinning the research. While this hierarchy can offer a glimpse of how color words develop in languages, there are still a lot of limits to this research and it's a bit outdated. But it also gives us an idea of how languages can operate when describing colors. And while we can see a million colors, it doesn't mean we are describing them all, and we also differ in how we use and describe colors. Let's end this video with one more fact about colors in languages. The color blue is often missing from some languages. I mentioned Russian having two separate colors for light versus dark blue, but this is more of an exception. Blue is actually not present in many languages. Historically, the word blue was absent in many ancient languages, including ancient Greek and ancient Mandarin. This is largely because blue rarely occurred naturally as a pigment in a form that could be easily dyed or painted until much later in human history. Also, blue is historically rare in languages because the color is exceptionally rare in the natural environment and difficult to produce synthetically. Without a physical need to identify or dye objects blue, ancient cultures did not develop words for it, leading many to group blue with green or black. Ironically, while blue is rare in nature, it's also kind of omnipresent with the sky. But I guess that would be the only thing. It may have a different status. That's, I guess, another reason why blue is not present in the language of the Himba people. But let me reiterate that one more time. It doesn't mean that they cannot see or perceive blue. It just means they don't have a dedicated word to describe it.